And we had one gentleman in the room, and he was sitting there just telling us about his business and telling us about his business. And we asked him, "So, how are things at home?" And his wife was sitting right next to him. And when we asked that question, tears just started rolling down her face. He just started, "Oh, everything is good." And our response to him was, "Look right next to you." He just, in that moment, he just sat there and he stopped.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Iron Deep podcast. My name is Mike Stansbury. With me today is a great friend. He's been a fantastic mentor in my life, and I love every time I get with this guy and talk to him. Steve Cook, one of the OGs. Do you know what OG means, Steve Cook?
I hear people saying that about me. I've heard it said and see it posted many times, but I never know what it means.
You were one of the first house flippers on the internet. I think that your website was flippinghomes.com, if I remember, when you were in Maryland, Baltimore, Maryland. But you're one of the OGs as far as real estate investors go, and you've helped a lot of folks in this space, in the real estate investor space. And you've helped them with flipping houses, but you've also helped them with their personal lives, their family lives, and you've certainly helped mine. So Steve Cook, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Mike. I appreciate you having me and looking forward to this.
One of the things that we try to do here in Iron Deep is we want to talk specifically to men who are business owners. We've got a lot of guys that are in the real estate space, but also that are also entrepreneurs and other businesses. So, and we also want to keep the main thing, and we want to talk about, hey, what are we doing this for? And we always turn it back to, hey, most of our problems, not all of our problems, are spiritual problems. And I wanted to have this specific conversation about how do you abundantly live in Christ, right? If your business and your family life, maybe both, maybe one part of it is just in shambles. So Steve, my question for you to start off is, let's say that you have a friend that you're mentoring or somebody in the space, and they come to you and say, "Hey, my life's in shambles." What do you go to? What's your, where do you point them?
I got to tell you, Mike, I've been approached with that many times, as you're probably well aware, and you've known many of the people I've coached throughout the years. And these conversations come up quite often. And but they usually start out with thinking that if they can get their business right, then everything else will get better. And I usually have to say, no, that's not where we're going to start. The bottom line is, we're going to start with looking at your life holistically, and we're going to look at your relationships, going to look at your family. We're going to put an emphasis on that. That's certainly going to come before business. But where I always want the conversation to go is, where's your heart with the Lord right now? And and inevitably, every single time somebody comes to me where their life is in shambles, that relationship with the Lord just tends not to exist. It's non-existent at the moment. It's certainly an afterthought. It's pushed far aside, and they just feel as though they've got to work and fix other things, and they don't have time for God. And I'm always trying to communicate to them that you don't have time for that other stuff. That this is what your number one priority. You need to work on that relationship with the Lord.
It's one of those things where we feel like, I mean, and a man especially, because we compartmentalize so many things. You're like, well, we got to fix this over here and fix this over here, and then magically the other stuff will take care of itself. I know I've been in those situations before. Can you give me some examples of, without naming names, of some stories of some men, some entrepreneurs that were in that situation, and kind of what that story was of how you helped them, or how, let's be honest here, how the person that we point them to helped them get out of that situation, and how do they move forward?
So, I think that one of the things that everybody who I work with and everybody I coach, they know where I stand as far as my faith is concerned. And so I think sometimes they don't want to hear it. And that's when they beat around the bush and they start, the easy thing for people to talk about is their business. And even if their business has problems, they're comfortable with talking about that. They don't want to talk about the rest of the things that are going on. Um, I can think of one person who was in the middle of one of our retreats, and at our retreats, we typically participate as couples quite often, so the spouse will be there. And we had one gentleman in the room, and he was sitting there just telling us about his business and telling us about his business. And we asked him, "So, well, how are things at home?" We just cut right to the chase, and his wife was sitting right next to him. And when we asked that question, tears just started rolling down her face. And he just started, "Oh, everything is good." And our response to him was, "Well, look right next to you." And he just, in that moment, he just sat there and he stopped. Um, yeah, it was a very, very impactful moment for everyone, including him. But in that moment, he sat there and he said, "What is it that I need to do?" We said, "You've got to just stop all this other stuff. You got to start trusting Jesus. You got to give this all over to Him. You got to give your marriage to Him. You got to trust that He's provided you with enough." I mean, this is a guy whose business provided him with more than enough, but there was that drive to keep going for more and more and more. But the person who was paying the price for his drive for more was his wife and his family, and they were the ones who were being neglected as he was that pursuing for more. Um, to make a long story short, I mean, he ended up just being on his knees saying, "Lord, I need your help. I need you. I need for you to help me to love my wife the way she deserves to be loved." Today, their relationship is absolutely awesome. It is, they just have a fantastic relationship. He works a whole lot less than he ever did, but the beauty of it is his business is doing better than it's ever done. It wasn't like we asked him to sacrifice your career and the benefits that go along with that so that you can have family. It's like you can have both. And when you put the Lord first and you put God into the right perspective in your life, then everything is blessed. And I find that when people are grinding, that to me is the very first sign that God is in the wrong place in their life. And so I can tell you just from personal experiences of watching the success of so many of my students, you see them operating in grace, and their families are good, their businesses are good, and it's a much different picture. And in those moments that God is the forefront of their life. They're putting Him first in everything.
Yes, and it's interesting to see it's those moments, right, where people can be vulnerable and really, and in this case, it was watching his wife have that reaction, and the other's reaction for him to get to where he needed to go. For so many couples, and I know that this is true in my life, is sometimes, we think everything's as a husband. Sometimes I think everything is good. It's maybe because I'm not being vulnerable enough to ask my wife a real deep-hearted question. How are you feeling? How are things? Because sometimes you get on the train of life, and you're taking care of your tasks, and business is going how it's going, and then you forget the other passengers that are on that train with you.
Mhm.
But how does one become vulnerable? How does one do that and really um ask that question of themselves without being prodded? Does that make sense? Trying to what I'm trying to do is, like, the folks that are listening here on the podcast, how would you walk them through some questions that they may need to answer for themselves, and get real about, hey, what am I doing here?
I'm going to address that two different ways. One, you asked about yourself, but what you saw in the story that I just demonstrated was a person being vulnerable amidst other people, and that's a very, very rare thing. Everyone is usually trying to posture themselves as, I'm good, and no one wants people to see what your weaknesses are or where you're falling short. And sadly, uh, that is a very rare thing that takes place today. And so I feel like what we have done, particularly with the people I'm coaching, is that we've created an environment where that's welcome. It is actually expected. I mean, if you're not going to be vulnerable, you're wasting your time. You're wasting the time of everybody else in the group. But once one person is vulnerable and you see the responses and the reactions from everybody else, how they come alongside of you and they love you through it, they walk with you through that process, then people are able to be vulnerable. um, but it also starts with, your quiet time. For me, I'm actually in the process of trying to teach people some of the things that I am doing. And, I have a regular practice every morning that includes a whole lot of things, everything from Bible reading to prayer and journaling. But one of the things that I have been doing for many, many years is, what I call examining myself. And I have this list of questions that I go through. And, as I'm examining myself, I'm looking at my previous day and I'm looking at my upcoming day. And, so I look and I say, what did I do well yesterday? Where did I fall short yesterday? What opportunities do I have today to do better? Or do I need to make amends for the things I felt short with yesterday? But I literally, and I teach people to have a vision and, try to read your vision as often as you can. But those questions are a part of my vision. And so today I do it a little bit different. I have it in a digital notebook. And along with my to-do list, I have those questions. And so I'll read those questions and then sort of create my to-do list for the day from those questions. So, how did I fall short yesterday? Well, I snapped at my wife, and I probably need to say that I'm sorry to her. So, to-do list item, I write it down. But oftentimes I'll just send a text right away, so I don't have to write it down. But look, I'm really sorry for, how I snapped at you yesterday. And I think keeping short accounts of those things, and you have to be honest with yourself. Be willing to lay your pride aside. Um, not just because it's the right thing to do, but I think it's what God expects of us. He doesn't want us to leave those things out there. He doesn't want us to let that linger. And we're to just, as men, just go ahead and tackle those situations and continuously chip away and improve who we are little by little.
One of the things you just said there is keep short accounts. And I think one of the things I saw one time that demonstrated kind of the opposite is somebody that I think it was in one of our retreats that I had with you, is somebody was ready to talk to their parents again after a lot of years. And, but, trying to deal with something that they hadn't dealt with, and trying to deal with past pain or forgiveness or forgiving somebody. What is, so I know the answer to this, but I always like to hear you articulate it. But when you have a deep, deep hurt and somebody's deeply hurt you, and you're holding that, and and that now it's out. Now you've told either your mentor or a group of people about this hurt. What's, how do you lead them to do the thing that they don't want to do?
Well, first of all, I do not want to belittle the situation or the hurt that people do have and carry. It is hard. It is very hard. And, I think sometimes when we sit there and we give people advice, we can oversimplify this part. Yeah, and that at the end of the day, the bottom line is holding on to that hurt, holding on to that unforgiveness isn't hurting the other person. It's hurting us. And we can sit here and we can speak logically all the time and say, you need to just let go. It's better for you. And if a person's not in the right place for that, it's a difficult situation for them. I can sit here and I can tell people and I can try to justify, well, Jesus forgave you and you didn't deserve it, and you can forgive them even though they don't deserve it, and all of that is true. It is all true. Um, but I think that one of the number one things that I can do, and let me first just say, um, I experienced a couple of major hurts myself in the last decade, and I'll say about three of them that were really life altering for me. And one of them was being hurt by my church, and one of them was being hurt by family, and one of them was being hurt by somebody in business. And and I sat there and uh, I kept on in what I believed, trying to let go and trying to forgive. And I think I was going through that process. And I think I held on to that stuff for a long time, to the point where it was even coming out in me physically, from the perspective of not feeling well and things like that. Um, and 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 it is extremely damaging to hold on to those things. But one of the things that I would want to really challenge people with, that I ended up discovering, and I did not think that this was true in any shape, way, or form. The whole time when people would ask me, I would say, "No, I'm not mad at God," but I was mad at God. And I was mad at God, like, God, after all that, as hard as I have been doing, trying to serve you and putting you first and doing all this, how could you let this happen to me? How could, you put me into this spot? And I never really contemplated that until, not that long ago. And then in the midst of that, I was able to let go. And then letting go just made it, uh, brought so much freedom, and it gave me so much more clarity. And then all the things that I would tell somebody else, that you're not hurting them by not letting it go, and forgiveness is for you, and the benefits are for you. I had to approach everything not just from those direct situations, but my relationship with God as well. And that's where I think it all tied back to, was I needed him. I needed his help to help me with all of that, but I also had to acknowledge that I was angry with him and ask him to help me through that, because it wasn't something that I could do in my own strength.
Wow. Yeah, I identify with that so much because when I tend to say the same thing. Now, I mean, me and God are fine, but if I'm having a lull in my business, I'm thinking, well, man, aren't I doing the right things? Am I not? Um, am I not giving? Am I not? And every one of those is an indictment on God. And but those questions pop up in my brain, and I contemplate them. And I love one of the things that I think is a great takeaway for people is your quiet time. And again, quiet time is one of those things that's talked about in books. And you need to have good habits. You need to spend some time alone, meditate. Jesus in the Gospels spends a lot of time getting away from people and spending time alone. And it's, I don't necessarily hear a lot of preachers on Sunday talk about how much time he spent alone. I wonder why that is. And I wonder what the importance is of it being in the gospel, because I think you believe this. I know you believe this. I believe this too, that there's no unworthy word in the gospel. There's a reason for every paragraph in there, and it's in there multiple times. So, but how does, I know this sounds kind of like elementary, but how important is quiet time, and how do you do it? And you said, hey, I've got these questions that I ask, I do my to-do list, but how long has it been a habit for you, and are you good at it?
Uh, well, first of all, let me say I'm not good at it. I am a student who is always growing. Now, me saying I'm not good at it is a matter of perspective. Most everybody I know would love to have the quiet time that I have, which amounts to hours every day. I've been doing it for a long time. But I also say that the longer I'm following Jesus, the more I realize how little I know. and how much bigger he is and how much more there is for me to learn. And so I just want to put that into perspective. I've been doing it for a long time. Um, I feel as though that quiet, rest, solitude uh, is one of the most important things that we can possibly incorporate into our lives. And when you're not doing it, the reason people don't do it is feeling like there's a life there. There's hurry. They're trying to live life, trying to accomplish too many things. They think that life is about what they're doing rather than who they're being. Um, Business owners, entrepreneurs are especially guilty of this. I'm known to say that if you're an entrepreneur and you're working, more than 40 hours a week, you're abusing the gift of entrepreneurship that you were given, because that gift was given to you so that you could have time to do other things in life and still be able to accomplish from a financial perspective, or meeting your needs for provision in less time than what other people can do it. And if it's taking you more time, then you're not using that gift too well. But so here's what I do. First of all, I recognize how important it is. So I really block out an awful lot of time each day. I don't schedule any work before 10 o'clock a.m. And the reason for that is because I know that if I want to get my quiet time in, sometimes things come up. If I only schedule 15 minutes or 30 minutes, something can come up and eat away that 15 to 30 minutes very easily. And then all of a sudden, I don't have quiet time that day. And I think that's the way most people plan it. They plan 15 minutes. They get a call from their wife that says, "Hey, I need for you to drop the kids off this morning." And then there's no quiet time that day. And then, you got to go run this errand before you go into the office. Well, quiet time's the first thing that gets sacrificed. So I block out a large amount of time, and I've gotten good at using almost all of that time for quiet time, but there's also margin in there to take care of other things. Something else that I have really learned to like and enjoy is just that solitude of getting away. Whether it is going to a silent retreat somewhere and just spending a day and shutting off all technology and not having anything, but just being able to sit down and be alone with God. I covet those times and those experiences. I want that. I need to remove myself from the noise of the world in order to be able to hear from Him and what it is that He is doing and see what He's doing in my life. Today, I have the benefit of having a piece of land that I have recently purchased, and I go on out and I just go out there by myself and I work the land. But it is just a sweet time being by myself out there on the land, whether I'm actively working or riding on my tractor, or whatever it is, or just walking it. That time of just solitude, of removing myself from the world and deliberately trying to make time with Jesus, is just an awesome and incredible time. And I think it's extremely important. And I would tell people to put that on their calendar first and block out enough time to guard it and protect it, and then fit the other things around that.
So I've had some interesting conversations this week, probably in the last couple of days, and these are just to piggyback on what you said. I had a guy that I'm buying a house from. I couldn't get in touch with him for 3 hours, and we needed to close the deal quickly. And he finally calls back and said, "Man, I'm sorry. I've been on the bulldozer for 3.5 hours. And when I get on that thing, I zone out. I get with the Lord." And this is my impression of him, by the way, folks. I'm just so you know, this is not his real voice. And I turned off my phone. So sorry about that. And I said, "No, that's great. I love it." And then last night I had a conversation with a guy, and he just kept talking about, "I've got this 1,000 acres that I just love going to. And I go to church, but I tell you what, when I'm there and it's just me and I'm on that tractor, or I'm baling hay, or I'm setting up deer stands, he goes, it's the best quiet time ever. It's the most sweet time I can have, and no distractions whatsoever." So I really appreciate you reminding, the entrepreneurs, everybody, the benefits and I would say that how necessary it is to just stop.
Think of this. When, Jesus said, look at the birds of the air. And think of that just as a commandment instead of just something that's in the Bible. Just stop and look. And it's awesome. That's a new sort of practice for me. It's not something that I have done a lot, but it really puts me into that time and that place of, being aware of all that God is doing. And it's something so simple. Just stop, look, listen at, what's going on around you. And you'll see God hand everywhere doing all kinds of things.
Steve Cook, thank you for being on the Iron Deep podcast. If people want to know more about you, reach out to you, where can they find Steve Cook at?
I would just say Lifeonaire, lifeonaire.com. It's where I'm doing my thing, and just put it into perspective. A Lifeonaire is somebody who lives an abundant life. And that's my goal, is to help people live abundantly.
Well, you certainly did that for our audience today, and you've done that for me personally. So Steve Cook, thank you again for being on the Iron Deep podcast. See you later.